You want to know what I just realized? Zoom wasn't recording.
I just saw, I was like, because it just said Paige is recording the video.
Oh my god. Okay, so again for the audience. It would not be a video for me if I did not have technical difficulties. So hey world, it's Paige. Welcome back to my channel, and we're going to be doing a continuation of a series that I mentioned a while ago about how I got my job in publishing. I wanted to ask friends, so I'm joined today by a friend. Imagine that, I have a friend. You can introduce yourself again.
Hi, everybody. My name is Hana. I'm from the channel Story Nuts.
So we're gonna get into how Hannah got her job in publishing, what her job even is. I'm not gonna really be looking at the camera. I have this weird setup. We're gonna see how I edit in post. But hello, Hannah. Welcome to my channel. Tell everybody
Hi.
a little bit about your booktube, because that is initially how I found you.
Oof, okay. All right. So my channel Story Nut, I started it like 6 years ago now, exactly almost 6 years ago. It was never really supposed to be just a booktube channel. It's kind of basically where I go talk about all the media, but because most of the media I consume is books, which actually I think that's a lie. Most of the media I consume and have a lot of thoughts about is books. So I just, it's kind of what it's become. And booktube is kind of what I watch the most on YouTube, so that makes sense. I talk about a lot of different things. I would say more recently I've started talking about a lot more nonfiction that I've been reading just because I've been reading more of it. But I'm trying to get back into YA, fantasy, and just fantasy in general. So there might be more of that. But yeah, that's my channel.
I'm curious, because I don't think I know this. Did you start your channel before you got your job in publishing?
Oh yeah. Yeah,
Oh,
way
okay.
before.
I wasn't sure it was like chicken or egg situation.
No, no, no. I actually started my channel way before I even knew that I was gonna have a career in publishing. And I think at the point where I started my channel, if you'd asked me then if I was gonna work in publishing, I would have said probably not. I don't think that's for me. Just because having been on the internet for a while and following people like Book Riot and things like that, I did know a little bit more about the publishing industry than I think most just people who consume books in general do. And because I had thought about it, literally that whole summer right after I graduated, I was thinking about all the things. I was like, what do I want to do? And I did think about publishing, and I looked into it and stuff, and I was just like, this seems like it's a hot mess. I don't want to do it. And then
I mean,
somehow 2 years, 3 years later, almost 3 years later, I ended up there anyways. So
I think we've kept people in suspense long enough. So, do you want to tell them what you do in publishing?
So I work in foreign rights, basically. I work at a literary agency in Canada. What I do basically is work with publishers and other literary agencies, domestic literary agencies, to sell their books, their clients' books, into markets outside of Canada. The agencies and the publishers are our clients, and then their clients are the writers that you're probably more familiar with. So basically, what I do on a day-to-day basis is try to make sure that we can sell the subsidiary rights. Subsidiary rights is anything that isn't the first initial instance of the book. So anything that else that isn't that's subsidiary rights. So film, when you guys see film deals, those are subsidiary rights. I don't really work in film, although I do work with people who work with film, but mostly I work in the translation markets and increasingly in the UK and the US. But I started kind of with the translation, so getting books translated into Italian, German, simplified Chinese, Korean, that kind of thing.
So, you already previously kind of alluded to this, but you said you weren't anticipating getting into publishing. So, how did you end up finding yourself here?
Honestly, I know it's not a very glamorous answer, but I literally just needed a job. And I was doing a lot of different contracts and was coming to the end of one of my contracts. Oh, actually, I should probably preface this by saying what field I did actually end up working in after I decided not to work in publishing. So after I decided that I didn't want anything to do with publishing, I was like, but I still like arts and the world of arts and that kind of thing. So I did a postgrad in arts administration and cultural management. Basically, what that means is I worked people who run theater companies and book festivals and other kinds of festivals and just visual arts, museums, that kind of thing. So I did a postgrad in that because in my mind, I was like, I like all those things. And although it's still a hard field, it's better than like limiting myself to just this one thing that is publishing. It's like, it's good to have like some other options. So I ended up working with places like I worked for a film festival and I worked for a book related kind of organization. And then I also worked for just like city programming. And then I was coming to the end of that particular contract and looking for like a job. And I saw the posting for my job. And while when you're job hunting, you're kind of like looking everywhere, right? Like it's like, I just need something to help me pay next month's bill. I wasn't quite at that stage yet, but it was like, I need something to help me pay the bills. And so I ended up applying for that job. And what drew me to that job was just this idea of like figuring out what kinds of books and stories other people who aren't of the same like cultural and whatever background as me would want to read. So that was kind of like the first draw for me, aside from the I needed a paycheck kind of thing. But I won't even lie, that was honestly my main concern. And I am the kind of person who can't really work in a job that I hate. So that was important for me, that I enjoyed what I was doing, but I also really needed to get paid.
How long have you been at the company?
So January 2017 is when I started. So almost 4 years.
Jesus. So like basically Hana is the auntie in my friend group of publishing.
God,
You have the
I
most
mean,
experience.
yeah. Do I? Oh my God. That's
Yeah,
funny.
you do. You definitely do.
Yeah.
Did you end up doing any school for publishing? Because that is a very common way to get in compared to like how you did get into the industry.
In that summer of indecision, I did think about doing a publishing program. And I remember emailing someone who went to the same school, like the same undergrad that I did. And I don't know how I found this person's email, but I found this woman's email and like out of the blue, literally just emailed her going like, I'm thinking about doing publishing school. I also graduated from the same program that you did. Do you think it's a good idea? And she was like, you know what, if you really want to do publishing, it is, but the market is pretty tough and there's not a lot of, well, and from her words, in terms of transferable skills that you get from publishing school, it's not as many transferable skills as you would from other programs. So I ended up saying no to that. And then I did, the program that I mentioned in arts administration, all of that. And so I didn't go to publishing school before I got my job, but in that first year that I was working at my job, my bosses were like, would you be interested in doing like an introductory course to see what it's like? And then if you want, we could pay for that. And at that point, I was like, yeah, sure, why not? Like, if you're going to pay for it, I'm going to do whatever you want. I live in Toronto. Well, right now I'm not in Toronto, but usually I live in Toronto. And there's Ryerson University has this program, which is a continuing studies program, and you can do like courses at your own pace. And there was an option for a night course. So my bosses were like, would you like to do that? And I said yes. So I did the intro to trade publishing, is I think what it's called. A friend of mine actually was talking about it. And she's like, the course, while it didn't teach me too much, it gave me the language to talk about things that I already knew. So it was helpful in that way that I got a lot of like, language about things that I knew about, but I didn't quite know how to talk about, and publishing processes. And also it gave me a glimpse into other departments that I'm not familiar with. And I think people got a lot from like my being there also, because like the world that I live in, like in terms of like the publishing industry, it's very like not many people know what exactly I do.
Yeah, I will say like even though I went to like publishing school and we had a rights class, I could not tell you what we learned in that rights class. Remember, not a thing from
It
that.
was like not to, I really did love my instructors for that course. And I'm not like saying this to like, talk bad about them or anything, but like it was funny because when we were doing the rights section, like my profs would be like, Hannah, why don't you tell us a bit more about this? I was like, I guess I'm teaching the course now. A lot of publishing is like that though. Like you learn on the job. If you've been doing the thing, you can probably talk about it in a lot more expertise and concrete way than like if you're just teaching it. Like it's hard to teach a lot of the stuff that we do, I think, at least that I do in my job. Like it's really hard for me to teach it to someone without like involving them in the process of doing the work.
We have very different like experiences with publishing programs, so do you think they're worth it from your opinion?
Okay, so I actually just think the way that most publishing programs are run is like predatory. And
I was thinking that word literally.
I don't like publishing programs. Like, I think they are another way that the industry continues to be exclusionary and kind of put barriers in place to people of like different backgrounds, specifically people of color. It's not very accessible to a lot of people. And because of that, I think that it makes it, even if there is valuable stuff that you're learning, it just, to me, I just don't see the point, because the only people who are going to go to these courses are the people who already have the means and the time and like the mental capacity, whatever, to do these, and the physical capacity even. Like, that's just a lot of things. So it kind of perpetuates this whole like cycle of exclusionary hiring practices and things like that in the publishing industry. I do think when you're being realistic about things and you're talking to someone who's interested in joining the industry, it's hard to say to them, never do a publishing program, you won't gain anything from it, because that's not true. It's just not true, because you will gain, like, at the very least, the one thing that you'll gain from a publishing program is connections, networking, because publishing is so opaque. Like, you cannot, if you're not in with the right people, you just don't know how to do it. It's hard to say to someone, don't go to publishing school, you'll not get anything out of it, because you'll at least get that. Most publishing courses are taught by industry professionals who are actually working in the industry. What I always say is, like, don't bankrupt yourself trying to go to publishing school, because chances are you're going to graduate, and logistically you just cannot be guaranteed a job, because there's not, like, if just looking at the numbers, there's not enough openings for all the people who go into publishing schools. And I think the schools themselves are so predatory in that they accept so many people, and like there's classes of like 30, 40 people, and I'm like, and then there's different classes of in the same school, and then there's like multiple schools, and I'm like, how are all these people going to get jobs? They're not.
I think another good point you made, because we had a Q&A a couple weeks ago now, one point you made during that was like another benefit is the job boards, because schools get specific job boards where they will post all the internships specifically and that kind of stuff for people.
Internships don't get posted anywhere else. They get sent directly to these programs. And I think that is very, very, very slowly changing. But it's still, I think for the most part, the internships go first to the programs, and then they might go elsewhere.
So you briefly spoke about your job earlier and like a little bit about what you do, but like what is an average, not like an average day, because I know day-to-day things change, but like some average like tasks that you get up to on a weekly basis?
I'm just gonna like describe this mythical average day, because as you said, it doesn't exist. So because I work in foreign rights, basically everyone that I work with has already been up and at work for like 6 hours or more by the time that I get to my desk. So the first thing that I have to do usually when I like get to my desk is like have a look at my like insanely full email inbox, because like people in China have already gone to bed, and so I have like 500 emails from them. And then like I have all my European colleagues and things like that. So I'll usually just go through my email and like flag things like that. And then because we have pretty regular meetings with clients, it's very rare that there's a week that goes by that I don't have a client meeting. We do try to push those meetings for the afternoon so that we have that morning period to kind of like prepare, do whatever else we need to do, and have internal meetings, which we do have quite a bit of. We're a very small company, so there's like four of us that work like on the specific rights selling part. There's admin people and operations people and that kind of thing. Usually we'll have like on a Tuesday, for example, we have our morning meeting where we kind of just like kind of check in about all the priorities and that kind of thing. And then depending on the day, most of my work is split into two things. I do contract, which just, looking at the contracts for all the like translation deals and that kind of thing that we're doing, or submissions. So submissions is a very small word for a wide range of tasks. Like there's a lot of different things that you could call submissions. I do either direct submissions of like books to US and UK editors, or other English language speaking countries. So there's Australia, New Zealand. Sometimes we do India and the South Asian subcontinent. That's kind of one form of submissions, is where I like write a submission letter and send it to people to publishers in those countries. The other way that we do submissions is we do work with agents in a lot of different countries where we don't speak the language. So like Italy, Spain, Germany, China. For that kind of submission, it's more like basically giving those people the tools to translate and then like sell the work in their own way, because we don't know these, like I think I know about these markets more than say like the average person in publishing even does, but I am not I'm not Chinese, I'm not Italian, I'm not German. I don't know what actually, like, how to actually communicate in those markets. And I know that there's other foreign rights people who do work directly in those countries. That's not how we operate. We work with the with local agents. Aside from the language barrier, there's also a lot of like cultural stuff that you just would not be aware of. And I've learned so much, honestly, just like being in this job. Is like, oh, it's rude to say this, or this is not how we refer to X, or these are not the formats of books that we publish here. So those are kind of like the individual tasks that I would do on my own. Part of working in a literary agency, whether it's like you're an international agent or foreign rights agent like I am, or a domestic agent, a huge part of it is the like client care. I think there's people who have very different opinions about how to approach this, but there's just a lot of information and you have to kind of be careful about how you disseminate that information to the client. I'm of the opinion that you should be as honest as possible. Or at least as honest as your client wants you to be, I guess, is the other thing. Because I know for domestic agents, and I'm not a domestic agent, so I can't speak to this fully, but I know for domestic agents, some writers are like, I don't want to know everything, but I want to know like X, Y, and Z. Like, for example, they don't want to know every rejection that comes in, which I can imagine why you would not want to know that. Some publishers or editors that I work with are like, you know what, just give me like the top notes. I don't want to hear like all the nitty gritty things about why this person didn't like my book. So a lot of just the client care stuff is often stuff that we do as a team, at least from my approach, because I think it's like, the way I approach something might be different from the way my colleagues approach something. And so just we kind of like brainstorm how to do that. That's why we have so many client meetings, actually. I will say that's probably the most challenging part of the job for me. Because I'm the kind of person who's like, just tell me everything and that's like, put it in an email. I'm good. I'll process it at my own time. But that's not how a lot of people work. And so you got to kind of figure out what works for different people. And there are people who are like me, who it's easy to just be like, here's all the info. But then there's people who are like, no, tell me just enough.
It's funny that you said that because that was literally my next question is like, what would you say is the hardest part about your job? And you literally already knew.
I used to say that I love writers. They're great. And, obviously I wouldn't have a job without writers, but I was like, I don't want to talk to any writers ever. And for me, that was the hardest because I do know how hard it is to write. I'm a writer myself. And so I do know that it's a very like personal kind of thing. And it's hard for you as a writer to kind of like disengage from your work and like talk about it the way that sometimes rights people do. Unfortunately, when you're like a salesperson, you do have to sell the book, like, so you do have to like talk about it at a certain way to make it sellable, which can rub certain people the wrong way. But it is the nature of the business. So for me, that was always the hardest part of like the job, and it kind of still is to an extent. But I think I've found like a groove kind of. The publishing industry publishes too many books. I think that's just a fact. Like there's too many books out there that get published, and we could probably all do with like cutting the amount of books that get published. Unfortunately, because of the way the system works, probably the books that get cut are the ones that should be available. But anyways, the reason why I say that is because there's too many books, and to every author, and I would even say to every editor and every agent, their book is the best book that's ever existed. And that is how your agent and your editor should feel about it. Like that's absolutely how they should feel about it, because why are they working with you on that book if they don't 100% love it and believe it? But when it comes to my job as a rights salesperson, I have to justify to an Italian audience why this book, for example, I'm going to use a Canadian, like for why this literary novel about an old Canadian man, this is not a real novel, I'm just making it up, like why they should read it. First of all, publishers have to spend money buying the rights to your book. So that's money that goes to you as a writer or to the publisher. And then they have to spend money hiring a translator. So that translation cost is a cost that domestic publishers don't have to deal with. And it's pretty expensive because you're also usually buying the copyright for the translation. So there's that. And then there's like the usual cost of selling, like making a book. So I have to justify to those people why your book that you are so in love with should be something that they buy. And sometimes that's hard for people to accept the way that we have to end up talking about the book. And then it's hard when the book is just not for that market or for sometimes any market. Sometimes a Canadian book is just for Canadian audiences, and that's fine. But I find in my job, there's always this expectation that I'm going to sell it to like 50 territories. And it's like, I get why you want everyone in the world to read your book, but not everyone in the world wants to. A number of times I've had to like bite my tongue because someone was saying about like, well, this book is important for Koreans. And it's like, well, probably there's a Korean writer who's written about it. So, they'll just read it from the local author, like, you know, which probably will cost the publisher less money to publish a Korean writer than to buy a North American writer's work.
I feel like that's just like media in general, though, because I feel like Americans and like conversely Canadians, because we're all generally North America, feel so centered because our media has always been centered on us. So we can't fathom, like, I just think of people who like didn't realize like Parasite and like Korean dramas, and like they have a whole industry separate from us that has been thriving for years. Like that's also happening like with Mulan right now, like the focus on that when I'm like,
God,
people are like, there are tons of other like actual Chinese films about this story that are probably better than the Disney-fied version, no matter if they're trying to be gritty.
I've seen a few links for them actually. So
yeah, there's one from 2009 I want to watch right now.
Yeah, me too.
So conversely, instead of hardships, what's like the best part of your job? And if you say traveling, I'm gonna get very sad.
I do love that I get to explore so many different cultures and ways of living while I'm not living those lives myself. I think it's really important for me as a person and for everyone actually to just be aware of the fact that there's just different ways of living and people value different things. And so it's very, that part to me is like, that was kind of what drew me to the job, is like, oh, I get to work with people in all of how people interact with books in all of these different markets. My desire to know more about that is actually part of why I got the job. I think my boss was like, you said that you want to understand why people read books. I was like, yeah, I mean, I love books, you know, as much as the next person, but there's this idea that books are so much better than everything else. And why would you read a book when you could watch Netflix? And I've always been interested in that kind of thought. I just want to know more about the ways that art and media is consumed in other places that I'm not exposed to. And I think that's really my favorite part of my job is learning more about that. When I was traveling, like I remember spending so much time just asking people about like, you know, so how do you do this thing? And I'm like, I know I'm supposed to be selling you something, but also tell me more. I mean, I do sell, but also
you're like, I still get my job done, bosses.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's also important, like in those kinds of situations, if you are a person who's interested in right sales one day, it is important to sell your work, but also yourself. Like make people like you and know that there's more to you than just like your catalog of books. Because then if you don't have a book right now, in a few months or whatever, when you do have a book that's perfect for that person, they'll remember who you are. And so I do think that it is important to have like that personal kind of connection.
Yeah, I feel like that's something that tracks across into editorial as well. Like being able to form those personal connections is so important when you're trying to sell your stories and shop them around.
Yeah, I mean, because so I'll have meetings sometimes with people that I know going into the meeting, and even when I schedule the meeting, that I won't have a book for this person at this point in time, but like I'm interested in their work and their catalog of books that they've worked on, and maybe one day in the future I'll have a book for them. And I think as a domestic agent, and again, I'm not a domestic agent, so this is just me kind of speculating. I think as a domestic agent, it's important to have meetings with people like you that you might not have things to sell to them right now, just so that if you have shared interests, so that you know what you're looking for, you know. And so like I think that's something that,
and like you know what they have right now. So like if there's a book that's very similar, you know not to try to sell it to them, like all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, and this is not me like judging anybody for how they do the same job that I have, but I do think a lot of people focus like on the sell in those in-person meetings, and I think it's important to also focus on like the building the connections part of it. But again, I'm just one person. There's other methods that work for other people, and I mean, I've only been at this for like almost 4 years. There's people who've had like much longer careers and they do it very differently. So
okay, so we co-founded a publishing collective together. Truly, this was pushed by Hana because she lit a fire under all of our asses when we were all like, oh, we should do this, and then nothing happened, and then she was like, we're gonna do this. Do you want to tell everybody a little bit about BIPOC in publishing and what we're trying to do? Because I barely mentioned it on my channel, really.
I mean, we were talking about this. I was recently looking actually at that Twitter group chat that we had. By just sheer luck, me, you, Marina, and Eamon had like connected and like had that little like that group chat, and I think other chats where we would just like vent to each other all the time about like ridiculous stuff that we had to go through in like white publishing. And I was just like, I think we all just thought, you know, wouldn't it be great if there was a bigger group with everyone so we could all like connect and share like resources and stuff. So the group is basically, the way that it came about is we wanted to create a space for BIPOC in the Canadian publishing industry to be able to connect to one another, to share resources, to have that like venting space if you want it. And I mean, I think we've tried to make it more than just a space where you can vent, but that is an important part of it, I think, because it's so hard when you're the only person in your company and you experience things and you're like, am I insane or is this actually like ridiculous? And so that was kind of where like we wanted to make that space. And so I think for us, when the group launched last year, there was a lot of interest, and we had to keep reminding, and I mean, I'll speak for myself, but I had to keep reminding myself, this is what this group is for. It's not for all of these other things. It is for other BIPOC in the industry. And so we made a group, a Facebook group, and like emailed people and stuff, and we're doing events and things like that for BIPOC in the industry. We're also doing a mentorship program that is geared more towards people who are either in publishing schools or who are interested in publishing but aren't in it yet. Yeah, so that's kind of like an overview. I don't know if that's...
Yeah, I think that's like a good overview because like I never really talk about it because like my videos are like focused on books, and like even when I was doing my personal one I was like I briefly mentioned it, but I feel like it's better when there's like a two-way because like I feel like we have so many plans for what we want this to be, but it's like always like you said, that whole like, okay, but like how does this help actual BIPOC who are in the industry right now? Because it's the whole balancing acts of like, we want to bring more people in, yes, but it shouldn't just be our job to do this as well, is something else we're always like trying to think about. So what would you say are some of the biggest difficulties about being a person of color working specifically in Canadian publishing? Because I feel like the US is a whole other beast that we will not get into.
What I'll say is a lot of the stuff in the US we also deal with. If you're a person in the US and you're like, this is something I deal with in publishing, we probably deal with it too. But the added layer that I think is even more difficult, in my opinion, and is insidious about how being a BIPOC in publishing in Canada, is that this idea that we're all past this, that everything's fine and there's no issue. Like we don't have any, like there's no problem for BIPOC in Canadian publishing. We're good. You know, everything that's a problem about being a BIPOC in Canadian publishing, I think does come down to that. Because if you think there's no problem, then you're not going to try to like look for solutions or other ways of doing things. It doesn't even have to be like blatantly racist, although that's happened. It could just be like someone not thinking of like how something will look to a certain audience or demographic or whatever, or even to you, or even though the ways people act differently when you're in the room, like in a room full of white people. Like I've seen people catch themselves and I'm like, you would have said something differently, like you would have used a different word, or you would have been more honest probably if I wasn't in this room right now. And sometimes they don't catch themselves and then like they like try to backtrack. It's just weird, like the way that people act, or like the way that people will make assumptions. I think, I don't know if this is a lot of people experience, and I do think the way I experience it is also tinged with a little bit of Islamophobia, just a little bit. Because yeah, like it's very, I mean, I'm very obviously Muslim, and so I do, and this is something that's happened to me in other professional capacities as well. It's not just publishing, but just people kind of assume that you're a resource on all things your identities. So like I get that the most about being Muslim. You know, I'll get people asking me like to educate them on things, and I'm like, listen, I just go to Google. Why are you asking me? and I think the reason why I say everything comes back to this idea that there is no racism, because if there is no racism, then it's fine if someone asks you about this thing, because probably like they'll be like, well, why would you not think that I would ask a Christian person about this, like, you know, or whatever. So there's this idea that because we're all on the same level field, the passive aggressive and microaggressions that happen aren't like race related. It's like it's just the way things are. It's like, no, it's not. Like,
Yeah, I feel like what you said like really rings true. Like the whole like just like to be a person of color in Canada is to be gaslit, because the entire
yes.
like culture is basically like, we're so progressive, and we're like,
Mhm.
there are still issues with what you're doing.
Oh my God. Yeah. Or like this, I mean, I always bring this up because I just feel like it's my duty as a settler in Canada to always bring it up. But just we don't spend enough time in the publishing industry specifically thinking about how we are complicit in the erasure and the ways in which we interact with Indigenous communities and the ways in which we talk about them. Like sometimes I think people like try to like do like this past tense thing with Indigenous people are here. they've been here. They're not in the past. And so I think the publishing industry has a lot of reckoning to do when it comes to like how we think, talk, and interact with Indigenous communities. There's not enough Indigenous people in publishing. There's not enough anything of color in publishing. But I think given that we're in Canada, to me it's just such an injustice, because it's like someone coming into your house and saying you can't use any of the things that are in your house. That's what it feels like to me. And I'm like, that's wrong. Like a lot of people who used to work in publishing, in mainstream publishing, ended up getting pushed out and like starting their own presses. And then they'll go like build a whole thing and build an author, for example, and then that author will then move over to a bigger company. And like just that whole, it just really, really pisses me off. So I think that's and I'm not Indigenous, so I can't like speak to how it actually feels. But I think that's another thing that I think is one of the most important things that we need to think about as an industry, like, and specific for Canada. I'm sure it's like, I know it's specific to the US too, but I feel like the conversation is just tinged differently in Canada.
What you're mentioning about like the authors coming over to bigger houses, it's very interesting to see how like now they've realized there's money in publishing Indigenous voices. They've suddenly like, it feels very like commodified and sort of like you said, predatory in a way sometimes when I see some of these books, especially because it's a lot of like trauma narratives that are usually glorified in a way.
It's very frustrating as a person who works in the agenting world, because you do want the best for your authors, right? Like you want the most money, the best team, the most publicity, all of that for your authors. And unfortunately, oftentimes what that means is placing them in a bigger house and getting them that like attention. And it's very frustrating, because you're like, this is probably what's best for the author. But when I think about it from like, a wider lens, it's like, yeah, it's what's best for the author, but I can't imagine being the person who built up this author. And now it's like, it just feels wrong to me. And I don't know what the solution is. It's just something that I don't feel good about. And I mean, I do work with some of these authors, and like, I'm not, as I said, I'm not a domestic agent, but I do know how that process goes. And again, from a business point of view, for your job as an agent is to do the best thing for your author. Like that is your main job, is to make sure that your author gets the best deal out there. And oftentimes the best deal out there is this path that I feel so like strange about. So
How did you feel about like seeing, especially like early June? Was it early or late June? I think it was early June.
mid-June,
With like, the reckoning of like, oh, we want more like Black voices, we want more authors of color like in our inboxes. Like, how have you been feeling about seeing a surge of requests, I'm sure, for that kind of stuff?
I haven't seen a lot of, if any, Canadian deals come out of it. So it's been like, what, how long now? It's been like almost.
That's equally as interesting though to hear that.
Yeah. So to me, it just was another way that Canadian publishing likes to kind of look like it's doing the work. And to me, every time I saw those, like, great, I'm happy for those authors. But I have three thoughts that come to my mind when that happens. First, to the agents, it's like, why weren't you looking at these authors before they submitted to an unagented submission? Because I guarantee you that most of these authors have tried to go the like traditional find a literary agent, then find a publisher route. And why weren't you there reading their work and looking at their work and taking it to your publishing friends? That's my first question. The second question is like, to the publishers, is like, are you actually going to put in the advance money that these authors deserve? And two, even if you give an author like a lot of money, or what they deserve, in your eyes, I'm not going to go into that, but what they deserve for that book, are you actually going to support them in a meaningful way without expecting that author to be like the spokesperson for their whole community? And the third thing that goes into my mind, because the thing that someone recently described, and I think it was actually someone at your company, described publishing as like a big venture capitalist kind of, is that the word?
I don't even know what that word means. So
where you like fund a lot of projects in the hopes that one or two of them will
okay, yeah, that sounds
succeed.
Right.
Yeah. So someone described that's how publishing works. Basically, you fund a lot of things in the hopes that a couple of them will succeed and pay for everything else. A lot of those books from those unagented submissions, some of them will do well, probably, but a lot of them might not. and it won't be the author's fault or the book's fault. It'll just be the way the market is, the way that we publish too many books. Like there's just too many books being published, and this year I think there's even more books than usual. So there's too many books being published, and so these authors, some of them will not do very well, but it won't be their fault. But what often happens with BIPOC authors, and specifically Black authors, is if their first book doesn't do well, then they don't get a second book, or they get so much less money for their second book. You don't see the same happening with white authors. So to me, it's like, are you going to give the Black and the BIPOC authors the same, the ability to fail and try again? Because I think that's something that we don't think about a lot, or we don't talk about a lot at least, is that's really the main thing, is we don't, BIPOC authors aren't given the opportunity to fail and try again and again and again, like white authors are. So those were kind of the three things that were going in my mind, is like, one, when this author who you found in an unagented submission, when they don't go on the bestseller list like you're hoping they will, are you still going to support them? And then agents, where the fuck were you?
I love that you were like, I have a 3-point answer to this. I am prepared. I am ready.
I wasn't even prepared. I was just like, these are the things that I think about when I see those things. There's been so many of them. It's like I had to think about it.
So we already, apparently there's not been much on the agenting front of change in Canadian publishing, but have you seen a lot of substantial or long-lasting changes starting to be made?
I've been away from work for a little bit.
Yes. You've been creeping though. You've been creeping.
Yeah, I've been creeping. So I'm just gonna say that, just so that in case there is something that is happening that I'm not aware of because I've been away. I don't think so. I just, and I was gonna mention this in your previous question, but I think another thing that I think about when I see those calls is, great that you're having calls for writers, and I'm happy for those writers, but this change also has to happen internally. And so I need more publishers, agents, everyone to look at their own house and like look at how white it is. So I haven't seen a lot of changes, I'm not gonna lie. I've seen a lot of conversations. I've seen a lot of people talking about how we need to change things. So I've seen a lot of that. But to me, what it feels like is like a lot of people right now are like, they just want like the silver bullet solution or whatever. Like they just want the answer right now. And so many of these people who are now starting to engage in this conversation are acting as if we haven't been having this conversation for a long time. And this is something that I've experienced since we even started the BIPOC of Pub last year, where people will like have lunch with me or whatever and be like, so how are you going to fix everything? I got asked so many times that my answer, I kind of found my answer, and it is like, I want us all to come to the table and try to figure out a solution. Like we do this for so many other problems in the industry. Why can't we just all come to the table and try to figure out a solution without expecting like one person or one organization or one thing to be the right, to have all the answers? And then when we do this, we often come up with a solution, and then when it doesn't work, we come back and like figure something out. But I feel like people just want the one answer and that's it. They're like, I need to know what to do so people will stop calling me racist. You're not doing this for the right reasons. Like that's what it feels like a lot of what's happening in specifically in the agenting world, but I think in outside of it. To me, it's like you have to be called out because you spent all this time without ever being questioned about anything. So the calling out process is part of it. Like it's part of your growth. So you got to deal with it, because a lot of people are like, I don't want to do this because we're going to get called out. And then they're like, I don't want to do anything because we're going to get called out. And it's like, you should try. And yes, you might get called out. You know, that's part of the process. You got to deal with it.
Yeah, I feel like that just is like something in the industry in general, is like the fear of failure. So you don't really, like, you have to have a proof of concept before you do anything. And like that's like one of the most frustrating parts for sure. And I feel like that's going to stagnate us in a lot of different ways.
But like just treat this like you would treat any other problem. But maybe that's not, because publishing does that with a lot of things. Actually.
With literally everything.
Like just accept that you'll have to fail. And yeah, I know that there's like financial and whatever implications to failure, but I don't see another way forward unless we accept that we're going to have to try something, see if it works, and then if it doesn't work, try again. Like we have to keep trying. To me, it's like we can't stop trying. Like that's not an option. So like I just wish people would accept that.
Do you have any wisdom you'd want to pass on to like a person of color who is trying to get into publishing, like something you wish you could have told the you that was about to step into the industry?
Know why you're here. I think that's important. Like why are you here? Obviously to get a paycheck, that's a good reason. If that is the reason you're here, that's a valid reason. Also, but I would say like there's other places that you can get a better paycheck. You know, maybe you're like me and you're like, I need to work with something that I care about. So me and Eamon were on the phone earlier and she said this, and so I'm using her word now. And she said, be very honest with yourself about your reasons for being here. And so I think that's something that's extremely important for any job, but I think especially in this industry that likes to use our love of books and reading and that kind of thing against us. It's very important for you to know why you're here and to know what your limits are, because even if you know why you're here, there's still going to be a limit where you're going to have to make a decision about whether you want to stay or leave. And then know why you're here, but you don't have to share that with your like employers. Like I think that's important because people as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, publishing, and I think a lot of like arts industries like to use the fact that we're creating art and books against the people that are working on these books and be like, oh, aren't you glad that you're getting to work on books and reading? Which is, yeah, I'm happy, but also I need to pay rent. So just those things can be used against you, including the things that why you're here. So just be very aware of that and keep it close to yourself and like a few close friends. This is like a little bit of a shady thing to say, but always make, oh my God, I'm laughing, but I'll say it anyways. Make your employers think you're going to leave at any moment and you don't need to be here. Again, because this industry likes to like use these like things about you against you, it's important to make sure that people know that you don't have to stay here. Like I think honestly that's why I've been able to stay as long as I have, because and this is very true I think for me, even like I'm not even lying about it. Like I think I do love publishing and I like working here, but I think that if I ever get to a point where it's like it's just not worth it for me, I'm fine to leave. And I think everyone in my like professional life knows that. It's like I could leave, I don't mind leaving. If you can truly believe it, that's great, you should, but just make people think that that's what you're gonna do.
What about like general tips for like people in general trying to get into publishing, don't know what to do, where to start? Are there any like resources or anything they should know about?
I think try to you know learn as much as possible about the industry online. I think there's a lot more resources now online than there used to be before. And also if you're like I want to be an editor or I want to be a social media coordinator or whatever, try to find like follow people on social media who do that. And kind of like see if only if their like account is like more professional than like
I wouldn't call our accounts professional, Hannah, even though we have our handles in our bios. I don't know if we're professional.
I think I'm thinking more like, like don't go on someone's Facebook or something like that. Like don't do that. I think Twitter is probably a good place because like also if someone's account is blocked, just if you don't know them, don't find people like Paige who talk about this kind of thing. Because I think there's more people than before now doing that. So like go on YouTube and type like how to be a literary agent or whatever, like that kind of thing. There's more now, I think, more Q&As and things like that are happening. I think we've done one. I know other organizations have done that. So do try to keep an eye out online for those kinds of resources. Do what I did and find if you have an alumni from your school who like is currently in publishing and like message them and ask. There's never, be polite and be ready to receive a no, but I think it's fine to ask someone for an informational interview. Like,
Yeah, I've had people reach out to me via LinkedIn just like asking general
yeah,
questions as well. So like
yeah,
if they seem open to it, I'm sure.
exactly. But like again, be very prepared for them to say no or not to respond, because it's not, these people have jobs and usually they're underpaid and overworked. Follow us. Like I was like, follow us at BIPOC Pub. We do try to like speak very honestly about the publishing industry. And our programming, I will say, is exclusively for BIPOC. So if you're BIPOC, that's great. If you're not, follow us and hope you can learn from what we post online.
I have a question that I just thought of while we were talking. Do you think it's of use to have a public platform? So like how we both have like booktube channels, like do you think it's because I know like publishing used to be so opaque and it was all about like the quiet prestige, but do you think it's becoming more about like public currency online? I don't know how to word it, but
I don't know that I have the answer. I think in certain positions it is. Like I think for both you and I, it might be useful because for you, you do a lot of what you do at work. Like it's kind of connected to what you do on BookTube. And for me, I think not as a foreign rights agent, but I think as a domestic agent, I know that a lot of people tend to go to the people who have a more a lot of authors, for example, tend to go to people who have more followers on Twitter or whatever. And I don't know if that's good or bad. I think it could be both, because one, that's more visibility. More visibility means you're getting a lot of like probably submissions that you're not interested in. In terms of like, for me, what I have found useful about this and my job is that it allows me, the way that it directly affects my job is like, I do try to be as concise as I can on BookTube. Haven't been trying as much lately, but I think my last two videos are both like over 20 minutes long. But like, it does help you talk about, like, it gives you the ability to talk about books in a concise way and kind of that kind of thing. And I think that I've used that a lot, especially because, as I mentioned, like, we have meetings, like they're half-hour meetings. You have a whole catalog of books that you need to talk about. You got to know how to talk about it quickly. But in terms of like, I didn't use my channel at all on my, like, to get my job. I think the conversations that I've seen online, though, through having this channel were important. As I mentioned, like, I was following Book Riot, and they talk a lot about publishing and that kind of thing. And I think now I see how they do talk a lot about publishing. They don't have like as much inside scoops as you would expect. But when I wasn't in publishing, it was very valuable for me to hear about these things that I wasn't having any other way to find out about. And I would say that I found out about like these kinds of people and podcasts and things like that through being on the bookish internet. Yeah, I think it's useful. I can see how it can be harmful though. So that's the thing. It's the freedom of information. That's the thing. It's easy to access information if you have like an online presence and you're aware of where to go, because it's easier to get information that way. If you're not online at all, like, I honestly don't know. Like, if you're someone who's not online at all and you're like, how do I get into publishing? I'm like, I don't know, go into like publishing school. Unfortunately, like, that's unfortunately what it's going to come down to, because I don't know what else people can do at this point. That's what I mean when I say this industry is so opaque. Like, it's just hard to like get that info. But there are people now who are doing more to kind of like break down those barriers and talk about the industry more. So I hope that in the future it's easier to get info. It's really hard. I'm not gonna lie, like, it's really hard.
Yeah, I truly can't even remember how I knew to go into a publishing program, like, after my degree. How did I figure that out? I don't know. It was definitely online somewhere, but I was watching, like, a lot of, like, you said, like, publishing YouTubers, like, the British people who were online.
Yeah.
So I feel like that was
We
useful.
don't do a very good job as an industry of marketing ourselves. Like, we have all these marketing professionals who market the books. Like, why can't they? Like, people don't know unless you're like looking, they're doing a lot of research. You don't know who works in, like, aside from editors, do people even know what other jobs are there in publishing? Like,
yeah, but I feel like it would be a danger to ask like publishers to do that though, because I feel like they would very much glamorize the industry in a way that would not prepare people for actually how overworked you end up being.
What's very annoying, because yeah, that is a danger. I think it's also dangerous to ask like publishing schools to do it, because they want people to go to these programs, and so they'll also do the same thing. So I don't know who has to do it. I know the Fold did a thing a few years ago where they went to like Brampton schools and they had like 5 publishing industry professionals talking about their jobs. So I don't know.
I'm sure you have a lot of cool author stories, but like I want like your coolest, your top. Give the content that these people need.
Oh God. Okay, let me think about a cool author story.
Do you have any cool like authors that you work with? Give the people some names. I'm like thinking of one specifically that everybody will know. I know who you're
thinking of. Oh, that everybody will know? Oh,
I feel like everybody would know who I'm thinking of.
Okay, I thought you were thinking about someone else. I think who you're thinking of is Rupi Kaur. Is that it?
Yes.
Yeah. I do work with Rupi Kaur. She is a lovely person. I do really enjoy working with her. I don't know a lot of people who work as hard as she does. And I know that there's a lot of people who have a lot of opinions, but it's just, to me, it's like she works so hard. So she's great. I thought you were talking about David Cheriandi.
Oh, I love David Cheriandi, but like I feel like he's not as well known outside of Canada. So like
he's not. That's why I was like, oh, someone who everyone will know.
Yeah, no, I love David. Yeah.
David, I love David too. I think he is, there's the whole thing of don't meet your heroes. He's like the exception to the rule, for me at least. So it's really great. I mean, remember David, I'd met him a few times, but I remember after we launched BIPOC of Pub, I ran into him at a launch, and he, like, when he remembered who I am, which I was like, oh my God. And then so that was great. And then he was like, I wanted to email you to say congratulations, you're doing great work. And I was like, on what? Like, what did I do? And then he was like, oh, and he was talking about BIPOC of Pub, and I was like, oh my god, that was so. And that was just such a great experience, actually.
I literally have no cool stories. I just interview authors in rooms, like with a phone. Like it's not very
That's
glamorous.
that's pretty cool. I mean, it's not glamorous, but it's pretty cool. I think publishing is a lot less glamorous than people think it is.
Yes.
Like,
Like the only cool part is
um,
like the amount of like champagne we get to drink when we're all in the office together celebrating things. Like that's the fun part
oh my
of
god,
working in
so
publishing.
many, like, what do they call it? Like the
Toast, like that's
yeah, so many toasts. Yeah,
yeah.
I'm just like,
Wow.
why do I have an hour blocked off? I was like, oh, we're gonna go and have a toast for
Yeah.
someone. I was like, oh,
Yeah,
okay,
those are
cool. Like,
fun.
and I don't drink, so it's like, okay, I'm gonna go
Hmm.
eat some cheese, I guess. Like,
Yeah, and have like some sparkling
like,
water, which is like the always the other go to is like sparkling water, orange
yeah,
juice, and champagne are like the
yeah,
three.
yeah. So many of them. I mean, it makes me wonder, like, maybe we should like redirect the budget a little bit. Like,
I wonder like how much money they're gonna save this year because we're not in office to have all the toast for all like the fall awards that
true.
have been happening. We can end with this final question. Look at us, we made it here. What's one book that you've recently read that you want people to read? Recently,
Um,
like this year. Let's limit it to
yeah, I
2020.
know. I figure. Can I give like a fun answer and a serious answer?
Yes, you may.
So the serious answer is Superior, The Return of Race Science by Angela Saini. I think a lot of people think science is so objective and there's no like racism in science because it's like you're looking at data, whatever, whatever. Angela Saini does a great job of like showing how even these like facts that we believe are 100% true and whatever, all that research and all of this stuff is being done by humans who come into these things with their own preconceived ideas of what what things are, and racism is one of those things. And so she does a really great job of like investigating race science from like the early like 1600s whatever all the way up until now, and how it's kind of like resurging now. And she interviews a lot of different people from both sides. Like she interviews people who actually are like perpetuating these things and stuff. And I really appreciated that because it kind of like I learned some things. Like I think there's a lot of things that we know about, but we don't know the extent to which it was like meticulously planned out and thought of, like the ways that um, colonial powers put money into race science so that they can justify what they were doing and things like that. And just like it's, and she goes into a lot of those details. And so I really like that book. My fun answer is related, but not really. I was gonna say Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid. That book, I know that a lot of people have very conflicting opinions about it, but that book to me, I related to it so hard. Being a person who's been in a lot of non-black spaces, and someone who's had like a hard time kind of reconciling my black identity with the places that I've been. So before I moved to Canada, I lived in Abu Dhabi, which is not white, but it's also not black. So I was often the only black person in those rooms. And then here, and in publishing, I am often one of few, if not the only one. And Kylie Reid does a great job of like showing the like simple, teeny tiny stuff that white people do that you don't think are harmful and you don't think much of, but like that collectively it's like, oh my God. And it's very entertaining. So that's the other thing about it. It's so melodramatic and you're like, oh my God, these people are messy, which I love. Um, so I love messy drama. This Is How You Lose the Time War is my SFF. I was gonna mention N.K. Jemisin, but I think that's just it's N.K. Jemisin is like on a tier on her own. So, and I feel like everyone's heard enough about N.K. Well, not enough, but has heard about N.K. Jemisin. But This Is How You Lose the Time War is the first sci-fi that I read, and I was like, oh my God, I like sci-fi. But I think it's mostly because it's kind of like a sapphic love story, and you're reading like these two women writing love letters to each other, love letters that start out as a rivalry, and then you're like watching them kind of fall in love. It's great. I was like, oh my God, I don't think you're just trying to like show her up. I think you're in love with her. And so watching that was really cool. It's a bit like the language, I think, is very flowery and stuff. And so if you're not into that, you might be a little bit like whatever. And I think I don't love hard sci-fi, and I don't like when sci-fi gets too like into the weeds with the sci-fi stuff. And it wasn't like that, so it was great for me. I was just like, great, this is a love story set with time travel. That's all I need. And it was just wonderful. But it's given me like, I already have insane expectations for love lives and relationships. But I'm like, now I'm like, if you don't write me letters across the space-time continuum, well, is this even real? Like,
Thank you for talking to me, friend. Is there
thank you
anywhere
for
you want
having
to
me.
point the people?
I think like my main places are YouTube and Twitter. Like,
Yeah.
if don't go on Twitter unless you want to be like, I do
You want
overshare there.
Hana,
So
if you want to see Hana like
filtered.
thirsting over Jake Gyllenhaal, that is what you go to Twitter for.
I'm just so messy on Twitter. So I mean, if you want that,
Yeah, that's
welcome.
great. 10 out of 10
I
content.
am a little bit less messy on YouTube. I try to like be more like, more thoughtful and about the things that I put out. So that's the other place. You have the links, you can share them.
Yes, I will be sharing those in the description. So thank you guys for watching this video. Leave any questions you have in the comments. I can either answer or pass on to Hana to answer. Once
I
they're
can jump
at a
on there and answer.
yeah, is that she knows where my channel is. She knows what this video is going to look like, so she also can jump in the comments to answer. So yeah, I'll see you guys in my next video, whatever that ends up being. I think it's going to be about reading YA fantasy. We'll see. So I will see you guys later, but I'm going to continue this conversation here.